Hey, how are you guys doing? You guys, I was listening to you guys while I was over there. We're gonna need to amplify this a little bit. How are you guys doing? All right, good, good. All right, Genesis chapter 1, starting in verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, one day. We lose a little bit of the poetic language that is actually written here in the Hebrew text. And it doesn't translate 100% for us. But this is actually, for the Hebrews, this is a poem. We try to read it as if this is some detailed scientific account, but this is actually poetry for the Hebrews. And what's happening here is there's a rhythm that is being played out in Scripture. And so what we have is we have God creating this and God creating that. And when God creates this and it leads to that, it leads to this. And there's this rhythm that is built into the fabric of all creation. And so written and in reality, God put this groove, or he put this beat behind all of creation. And so there's this rhythm that stayed the same from the beginning of time. So every day leads to night, and every night leads to morning. Every fall leads to winter. Every winter leads to spring. Every 6 days we work, and on the seventh we rest. And so when we read Genesis, we see that God has created this rhythm. This rhythm exists. This rhythm was built into the way life is every day, all year. Everything has this groove, has this beat, because God created it that way. God wove this groove into the fabric of the universe. It's always flowing behind everything that you and I do, you and I experience, you and I live out. This is life. Okay, so last week we talked about sex. And we talked about how there was these preconceived notions about Christians, and we talked about how the world thinks sometimes that God is this killjoy when it comes to the concept of sex, and that if you're a Christian, you're just this angry, sexually repressed person, and we take our frustrations out on the world around us and judgment. And better yet, we actually talked really about how there have been those that have hijacked this message, the greatest message in all the world, this message of grace and love that is Jesus Christ. And they've hijacked this message. And we talked about what the Bible teaches about sex. And we talked about how the Bible teaches us that God created man, and he created woman, and he created sex. And we talked about how God created thousands of cells in our body for the purpose of sex. And we talked about God creating sex. If you missed last week, you should listen to it, because we talked about how God created sex, and we talked about how God put man and he put woman in this garden, and that he created the concept of them having sex. That we talked about specifically that God did not walk by one day in the garden and look over at Adam and going, "What are you doing to her? Get off of her." And we talked about how still some people believe that God only created sex for procreation. But then we talked about the Song of Solomon, and we saw that within the Song of Solomon that there's this fertile ground from which life springs, and that God tells his boy Solomon to eat and drink deeply of it. And we talked about how, and we read the magic of Solomon's words. I mean, this was the first Rico Suave, was Solomon. It's okay to laugh and smile, people. It's okay. We can do that tonight. And we talked about how Solomon, and we read it, he said stuff like, if you were honey, I would eat you. And if you were wine, I would drink you. And if you were milk, I would take a bath in you. Like, I think that's what he said. And we talked about how God responded, "What are you doing?" No, he didn't. We talked about how God actually responded, drink your fill, oh you lovers. And so we talked about how this doesn't sound like a repressed person, Solomon, and God doesn't sound like killjoy, and this doesn't sound like procreation. This sounds like God is pro-sex and that God created this to be enjoyed. And we talked about how powerful sex is. And we talked about how it goes beyond merely the physical. And we talked about how God puts these parameters around sex, and that a man will leave his parents and cleave to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. And that when you have sex, you leave bits of yourself and you take bits of your partner with you. And we talked about how the world would actually disagree with us about sex being more than just physical. And Tina Turner would say, you know, what does love got to do with it? And I can't even quote what 50 Cent would say about it. I'm sure some of you can. And we talked about, and we used for an example, that victims of sexual abuse and molestation, when their physical bodies heal, have they completely healed at that time just because the physical is healed? And we said absolutely not, because this is not merely a physical act. This goes beyond the physical. And so we ended last week talking about how gracious and loving Jesus is to those of us who have failed to remain pure. And you know what's fascinating to me? I didn't get a chance to talk to you about this last week, but what's fascinating to me is every time we read in Scripture about the parameters or the ideal, you know the person that Jesus lashes out at the most? He always lashes out at the religious, the ones that think they have it all figured out. And you know who he gives the most love and grace to? Those who have committed the most deplorable acts. So today, what I want to do, tonight I want to talk to you about sex in light of God's rhythm. And this rhythm that God created, the fabric that God created. Because we use this word love in the English language all the time for everything. In fact, we got one word in the English language, love. And we say love for everything. I loved that movie. I love my iPhone. I love Doritos. I love my girlfriend. I love my boyfriend. Surely we're not talking about the same thing. Like, I hope the way you feel about Doritos is not the way you would feel about your mate. And if it is, you got some issues that I'm not qualified to help you with. That person is a medical doctor. The Hebrews, they did things very differently than we do. And they lived life with detail, and they lived life with layers. And I think we forget when we read the text of Scripture that we're reading people that don't just speak a different language. They live in a whole different worldview. They do things differently. In fact, what they do is they use word pictures to describe stuff. And they ask rhetorical questions to teach. We don't do that in the normal Western culture. It doesn't matter if you're from the United States or you're from a Latin American culture. It is all Western, and it's opposite than this Middle Eastern culture that would use word pictures to describe things. Like in the text of our Bible in the New Testament, there are times that you and I can't get the full translation to come across because Jesus will go and be asked a question, and instead of answering it directly like we have in a Western culture mindset, Jesus will be like, well, listen, there was a donkey, and the donkey was walking. And he just starts telling this word picture. And you've probably done this because I've preached like this, and I've heard a gazillion preachers do it, is what we do in the Western culture is we take that word picture and we try to break it apart and be like, listen, the ring, this is what the ring signifies. And the cape that they're wearing, this is what the cape signifies. That's not what was going on for the Hebrews. That's not what they were doing. Not everything had a detailed explanation behind it. And so we forget this. The Hebrews, they didn't just see love and sex. They saw this complete complex, detailed, layered rhythm that God had created. And so I'm going to teach you that rhythm. If you spent any time in church, you probably have had somebody come up and teach you about the Greek words for love, right? Anybody? Just me. There's 4 of us. Okay, there you are. There's some of you are awake. Okay, you've heard those. All right, we're not talking about Greek today. We're going to talk about Hebrew, which is the Old Testament. So if you've heard those teachings from the Greek, forget it today. We're going to talk about the 3 words that the Hebrews use that your Old Testament, if you have an English translation, you're going to read in your Old Testament, your English translation, that your translators have translated this word love every single time. But for the Hebrews, it had completely different meanings. And so for us, loving our iPhones, loving our Doritos, loving our spouses, loving our mates, loving our boyfriends, loving our girlfriends doesn't translate because the way the Hebrews would say it would translate. So the first word I'm going to teach you tonight, we're going to all say it together too because we're going to learn Hebrew tonight. We're going to learn 3 words. You'll be fluent. Don't worry, listen, I've lived in Miami now for 6 years, and I can kind of tell my Uber driver where to go. Aquí, that's it. I got one word. ¿Cómo estás? Bien. ¿Y tú? Yeah. That's it. I'm done. Tengo el gato los pantalones. I got nothing. Okay, first word is raya. Say it with me. Raya. That was terrible. You guys 3 people. Ready? Say it with me. Raya. Oh my gosh. They can't be taught. All right. Well, say it in your own mind. We'll try it again. There's 2 more. Raya is the Hebrew word for companionship. Raya literally translates in Hebrew as companionship. Now, when I hear the word companion, I don't know if anybody out there is like me. What do you think of when you hear the word companion? Companionship. Dog, right? That's what I think. I automatically think of the dog, Fido. But that's not raya. The Hebrew word carries with it this implication, that I have seen you in both your good and your bad, and I'm still willing to walk with you. That's what the Hebrew word carries with it. Remember, I said they think and they speak and they communicate in word pictures. It's not like we have a definition out of Webster's. Think of this as raya is I've seen your good, I've seen your bad, and I still want to walk with you. And it's the fundamental element of what the Hebrews would consider our concept of love. You cannot have love without raya. Raya can be for a man, it can be for a woman, but it cannot be for an inanimate object or even an animal. So a Hebrew couldn't, quote unquote, love his house or love his camel. It wouldn't make sense. They couldn't do that. Raya is I've seen your good and I've seen your bad and I still want to walk with you. Raya can never take place on a first date, right? Never can take. Here's the reason why it can never take place on a first date, and everybody in this room is going to understand what I mean. Listen, every guy in here, for at least one night, can put on one clean shirt and put on some cologne, comb their hair, and not act a fool. For one night, one night. So raya definitely can't happen on the first date because you can't see the bad side in one night. Raya does not occur when all is well. If you're taking notes, if you're contemplating this, you have to understand this. Raya does not take place when all is well. It's a decision. Remember, there's this old DC Talk, which was a Christian band in the 90s, and they had this song, Love is a Verb. This is a decision that takes place the first time you see the dark side of someone. That's when raya takes place. It takes place at the point when you see the bad and you've said, I've seen this in you, and I'm still going to walk with you. When you decide to keep going, even when you see things you don't like. Now, this might be after 6 weeks. This might be after 9 months. Unfortunately, for some people, it happens after they're married. But listen, some people try to hide who they are, and they bring a great deal of pain on themselves and a great deal of pain within their relationship. And I get it. I know it's dangerous to throw yourself out there and to really expose who you are and show somebody who you are. The reason why that's so dangerous is because we all hate rejection. All of us hate rejection. In fact, they've done these psychological studies that people would rather face almost every other emotion other than rejection. We hate it. So that's why we lie. That's why we pretend to be somebody we're not. That's why we don't expose the things that we do wrong or the bad side of us or the dark side of us to other people, is because we're afraid that if someone saw our weaknesses, they would reject us. I mean, it's scary, right? I'll be the only one honest in here. It's scary. I don't like being rejected. Nobody loves rejection. But listen, the foundation of raya happens when someone gets to see the weakness. And they see, like, I don't like that, but I'm still walking with you. And love cannot go further without raya. Song of Solomon 5:16. This is, I think we have this up on the, yep, we do. His mouth is full of sweetness, and he is wholly desirable. This is my raya, and this is my friend, O daughters of Jerusalem. So your text, your English translation text translates that beloved from raya. It's the most popular term for love in all the Old Testament for you in your English translation. In fact, Proverbs 17:17 says, some people probably in here can even quote it, a friend loves at all times. That word loves is raya. A friend raya at all times. Someone's got this on a coffee mug, I'm sure, somebody in this room. So raya can occur between two men, it can occur between two women, it can occur between opposite sex. But it's the first beat in God's rhythm for love. It's the first beat in the way God created love and the way God created this life for us to live in relationship with one another. So raya leads us into the second word I want to teach you tonight. And the second word is ahava. I like it. Listen, if you don't spit when you say it, you're not saying it right, okay? That's how you know when you're saying it right. Ready? Let's try it again. Ahava. That was a lot better. You're going to get the third one, I promise you. And so ahava, literally translated, means love of the will. Now I'll explain it, word picture and all that stuff. Here's the best way to explain ahava. Ahava is, there's no place I'd rather be than right here, right now with you. Oh. Now listen, here's the problem with Western culture, and here's the problem with our culture specifically. I say that to you, and automatically all of us, the reason why we go, oh, it's because we have romantic comedy saturated in our world and in our life, and so that's what we think. Like, this is Jerry Maguire in our head right now, right? Oh, maybe that's too older. Like, some of you in this, when I say that, there's no place I'd rather be than right here, right now with you. Like, you're thinking of like, and like candles and like it's dimly lit and you're like, this is the place, baby. You know, it's like Barry White. Oh, let's get it on. Like, it's just like, that's what's going on in your head, right? So Like, we like to make this sound really, really romantic, but that's not what ahava is. Here's the word picture you need in your head. And I have westernized this as best as I possibly can. There's no place I would rather be than right here, right now with you. But this is the word picture you need in your head. It's your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your wife, your husband, whoever that person is throwing plates at you because they're so upset with you, and you are hiding behind the couch, dodging those plates, and you're saying, there is no place I would rather be than right here, right now, with you dodging those plates because you are crazy and you're throwing those plates at me. That's the word picture you need in your head. Because ahava says, I'm not going anywhere. That's ahava. No matter how crazy you get, no matter how hard things are, no matter how poor we are, no matter what issues we have to walk through, I'm not going anywhere. That's ahava. Now, here's the crazy thing. In all of Hebrew text, all of it, sex never takes place at raya. Sex never takes place at ahava. But these are the first two rhythms of the way God built relationships. Song of Solomon, chapter 8, verses 6 and 7 says, I'm about to, look, there was a worship song that came out, I think it was about 5 years ago. You're going to recognize this text only because of that worship song if you've spent any time in church. And I'm about to destroy that worship song for you because they took this text from Song of Solomon and they turned it into this was between God and man. It is not between God and man. This is between a man and a woman in a very intimate relationship. And so every time I would hear that worship song, I'm like, these people screwed this up. I'm putting that in your head now, and it's one of those things that I point out. Now you're going to hear it, and you're going to be like, these people screwed things up. And your worship leader, Pastor George, is in here, and it probably will never be played by him ever again after this moment, if he's ever played it. I don't even know if you have, Pastor George. I should have checked beforehand. Sorry. Song of Solomon 8, 6 through 7, it says, put me like a seal over your heart, like a seal on your arm, for love is as strong as death. That word love is ahava. Put me like a seal over your heart, like a seal on your arm, for ahava is as strong as death. How strong is death? Listen, everybody dies. How strong is death? You don't come back from that. So how strong is the will of ahava? Solomon here says his ahava for his wife is as strong as death. Keep reading. Jealousy is as severe as Sheol. It flashes are flashes of fire, the very flame of the Lord. Many waters cannot quench this ahava, nor will rivers overflow it. So raya is companionship. I know you, you know me. It's our strengths, it's our weaknesses. We've shared those with each other. You've seen them, I've seen them. We know who each other are. You know me, I know you. And it leads us to ahava. Raya to ahava. And listen, there's always this point in time in any relationship when you finally get to the point where you're like, you know what? This is the person I want to fight with for the rest of my life. I say that, and probably most of you aren't married, but trust me, you will get to that point. You're like, you know what? I'm going to fight with somebody. I might as well be this person for the rest of my life. This is the person I'm going to do that with for the rest of my life. That's ahava. It's struggling through life, because listen, you are going to struggle through life. You have two imperfect people that God goes, you know what? I want you guys to become one and go make some other kids and try to teach them how to be like you. But by the way, you're messed up. You're going to struggle. And Ahava says, I'm not going anywhere. There's no place that I'd rather be than right here, right now. And I laugh because in my head, I'm picturing being behind that sofa, dodging the plates. So we see that Raya is not natural. It takes a lot of work. It takes time and it takes energy. But remember, I told you, there's still no sex. Raya carries us into Ahava. And it's even more work. And there's still no sex. All this work and no sex yet. Thousands of cups of coffee. Lots of honesty. No sex. Lots of hand holding. Forehead kissing. No sex. This can't happen on Tinder. Can't do it. You can't get Raya and Ahava there. Not going to happen. But we find that God's rhythm is leading us, Raya, to Ahava. And it leads us to the third word I want to teach you tonight. This is the one you're going to get. Everyone's going to be able to say it. Dode. Say it with me. Dode. Dode is not yet sex. It's well beyond that. Sex is involved at Dode, but it's not the same thing. Love and sex are not the same thing. So relationship has been built on Raya. There's commitment and Ahava. And so what happens when Dode rolls around is Dode, if we literally translate it, it means the mingling of souls. It means two souls coming together. It also means to rock, to caress, but it's spiritual. It's not talking just about the physical, it's talking about souls. There's a physical part of this, trust me. I mean, we read Song of Solomon and we see when he uses the word dode, talking about his spouse, and we read the things that he says about his spouse. We know that he cares about his wife's soul, but he's also digging what that soul's wearing. Like he's digging those hips. By the way, I saw as I was driving here, Shakira's coming, speaking of hips. Forgive me, Lord. So our boy Solomon loves his woman's soul, but he enjoys her hips as well. And this word dode is used only in Scripture when it implies that Raya is there, Ahava is there, and dode is only used in Scripture when there's a marriage covenant. Only. Dode is not merely sex. God's plan is not merely an exchange of fluids. It is the mingling of souls. You don't make love to a body, you make love to a person. This is God's rhythm, his beat, his groove. Raya would lead to Ahava, would lead to dode. We've like elevated sex to this really difficult thing when in fact it fits perfectly into how God has created the rhythm and the groove of the world. And if we miss out on the Raya and the Ahava, there's something so dangerous. It's like the 900-pound gorilla sitting in the room that if you ignore it, it's going to kill you. That's truth. So listen, never in the history of the world has sex become so divorced from relationships than it is probably right now. And if you don't think this is a real issue, let me tell you, last year, U.S. porn companies made more money than all professional sports combined. So our sexual revolution has a husband who, instead of going to bed with his wife, goes sneaks into another room to go look at porn online. And when sex becomes detached from relationships, all that we have left is technique. And which is why our culture is so saturated with magazines, with articles. I mean, every magazine out there has an article about sexual techniques. So no matter how good we get at sex, it still becomes increasingly frustrating and unsatisfying and lonely because it's devoid of the way God created the rhythm for this world. Raya leads to ahava, leads to dod. And when you're playing out of God's rhythm, things mess up. Before the fall even occurs, God says that it's not good that man is alone. And 95% of all of Jesus' messages, teachings, everything that he has is about right relationships with God and right relationships with man, with others. So there's this raya piece, and there's this ahava piece. And if I could give you anything to take away, which I'm hoping to give you something here at the very end, but if I can give you anything, and let me talk to the guys in this room. Guys, of all the counseling I've done with men, whether it's those starting a relationship, those in the middle of the relationship, those getting married, or those that are married, I would tell them this. You know, the one thing out of raya, ahava, and dod that is so important for women is the ahava piece. There's something that a woman comes alive when she knows that you're not going anywhere. When she knows you're going to take all her crazy. A woman comes alive. Men, you will get to experience a relationship like any other when you embrace the rhythm. So raya into ahava gets us into dod. So, okay, how do you work this out, though, if you're single? I know some of you are like, well, listen, this is great, but I'm single, man. Like, most of us are single. Here's the best advice I can give you. Get a bunch of roommates. It's the worst possible thing in the world, too. Like, the worst thing you could possibly do is live alone. Because here's what happens if you just live alone. Like, some of you are like, dang, I live alone. Listen, here's what happens when you live alone. You convince yourself you have no weird quirks. And then one day you're going to meet this beautiful young lady, or you're going to meet this handsome young man, and you're going to get married, and the first 2 years are going to be you educating yourself on how crazy you are. So get roommates, ones that are not like you. It'll be horrible. But listen, as those two pieces of iron are slamming into each other every single day, you're going to start to understand who you are, and you're going to get sharpened, and you're going to get shaped, and you're going to have conflict, and growth occurs in community, and growth occurs in real relationships, and you are going to learn how to have raya for people. And you're probably going to get to learn how to have ahava for some people. I think that's why I know specifically here at Calvary, I know small groups are so important because, listen, let's be honest, small groups are horrible too. The reason why they're horrible is because there's other people in them. And they're painful. And it's hard to find one you like. Like, I'm telling you that, and I'm a pastor. And here's the reason why. Like, I've sat and talked with people, is because you start to go to a small group and you start being there every week. Remember, 1 week you can pull off and being whoever you want, but the next week they get to see a little bit more of you, and the next week you get to see a little bit more of you, and you start to let your junk come out where the people can start to see how quirky you are and how crazy you are, and you start to really expose who you are. But when you walk with other people, they get to see your bad and they get to see your good, and it's a scary, scary process, but it's so beneficial. Listen, in isolation, we live in a mirage. We become our own sitcom, and people just come in and out of it. And it's at the altar of self, and it needs to be destroyed. So do you want to have good relationships? Be around other people. Get roommates. Don't live alone. Conflict is good. Conflict is good. Because listen, when you eventually get married, it's coming. You can't put two sinful, selfish people in a relationship and say, hey, be one, and not have conflict. You will have conflict. So raya into ahava, into dod. Raya into ahava, into dod. Okay, so how do I get this into your heart and get this into your mind so that when you leave here tonight, that you're going to think about this? And here's the other thing, that you're going to feel this. So God has this rhythm. He created this groove. He created this that led to that. He created this that leads to that. And God said it was good. And the rhythm is playing. This beat is playing. And everything in this groove of life testifies to the rhythm that God has created. And when we're walking right in that rhythm, we know it's right. We can feel that it's right. Even when there's conflict, it starts to bring life. And we can feel it. And when we play within that rhythm, there's fruit. And when raya moves into ahava, that moves into the mingling of souls, sex works. And there's no guilt afterwards, and you're not dissatisfied. But if we get outside that rhythm and we hit some bad notes, and I don't care if you're tone deaf, you know something's wrong. And the sex you thought you would get out of and take out of this and take you out of loneliness only makes you more lonely, because we're out of rhythm with the way God created things. So listen, may we dance. When we dance in the rhythm that God created, may men work hard at raya and ahava, because it's fundamental. And one day, God will bring you the spouse to complete that into dod. And may raya and ahava swell up in you young ladies, that might lead to learning how to live deeply in relationships, that one day God will complete that in dod. It's my hope. It really has been my prayer this whole week that this rhythm would be taught to you and would stay in your hearts and stay in your minds, and that when we leave here tonight, this rhythm will be the rhythm that we dance to. Let's pray. Dear God, you've created things that are so much deeper and better than the world teaches us they are. God, what the world sells us is cheap. What the world sells us is an app. You've created it into a magnificent rhythmic dance of life. That is, it teaches us about our weaknesses, and it teaches us about our strengths. And it leads to something so much deeper. That we might learn companionship, that we might learn true commitment, that God, eventually one day, we would mingle our souls with another in that marriage covenant that you've created. God, help us to walk out of this room not just on fire with the knowledge that comes from your word, but deep inside of us, God, we would have this rhythm playing, and we would seek forth the way you've created things, to walk and dance in that rhythm, and to reject the cheap imitation that this world has given us to digest. God, I pray for every person in this room, Lord, and wherever they are in stages of a relationship, Whether they've started one, they're in the middle of one, or they don't have one yet. God, teach them, bless them, teach them raya, show them ahava, let them aspire to dod. And I pray this in your name, the name above all other names, the name that can give us this powerful, amazing, rhythmic dance that is graceful and merciful to us. In your name, Jesus, amen.